To find a left libertarian society, we don't have to look to another time or another country. We can find it here in America. Democratic schools have all the hallmarks of a libertarian society. Much like the government and the private sector, our compulsory public educational system is authoritarian in nature. All decisions are made at the top and flow down. Children are perceived to be empty vessels to be filled by what the state deems to be fit. They are to be disciplined, numbered, broken, and humiliated into obedience and molded for society. Before I discuss democratic schooling, it is essential to understand where and how public education came to be. We have to go back to 1806 when the Prussians were defeated by Napoleon's troops. After their defeat, the Prussians started to become introspective about their own institutions. This introspection led to the conclusion that Prussian pride and power could only be restored by restructuring that system. A strategy was devised, which the Prussian government would set up forced government educational system, which would turn out well-disciplined students who would follow orders without questioning authority. To accomplish this feat, the goal of educating children became a national priority infused with strategies adapted to turn out a national workforce rather than an educated citizenry. Every step in the education process was calculated to offer authority figures the least amount of trouble and consequently train a well-disciplined, albeit docile citizen. One of the main proponents of the system was Johann Finch. As he eloquently described it, the school must fashion the person, and fashion him in such a way that he simply cannot will otherwise than what you wish him to will. In another quote, he says, "Education should aim at destroying free will, so that after the pupils are thus schooled, they will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking and acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished." When the technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for more than one generation will be able to control its subjects securely, without the need of armies or policemen. The Prussian system taught duty, discipline, subjugation to authority, and the ability to follow orders. The best educated, meaning the most docile students, were rewarded by serving loyally in the upper crust of the wicked monarch, while the insubordinate students joined the working class. By the late 1800s, men in the United States, including Horace Mann, the father of public education, heard about the successes of the Prussian system. He, along with others, traveled to Germany to investigate how the educational process worked. Upon their return to the United States, they lobbied heavily to have the Prussian model adopted. Soon, the methods of the Prussian educational system swept through America. It is no coincidence that the Prussian system seems familiar to Americans, and that it demanded compulsory attendance, national training for teachers, national testing for all students, national curriculum set for each grade, and mandatory kindergarten. Between 1880 and 1920, private power grew larger than the state, and corporate leaders began to criticize schools for failing to respond to the newly industrialized, centralized, and increasingly integrated world economy. They sought centralization and efficiency in the public educational system by lobbying Congress. As always, the private sector prevailed. Today, public schools are treated as engines of economic development to lure business to a particular city or state, so corporate and local political leaders cooperate in their governance and redesign. In short, school policy has become labor policy. The similarities between our own education and the Prussian still reverberates through time. Much like our counterpart, the obedient student is allowed to join the managing class, while the student who critically thinks is weeded out of the system and left to join the working force. When students are taught to mindlessly read information and then regurgitate that knowledge on the next test, they have learned nothing. Education should be the development of independent and critical thought. Education should teach humans to live better, learn more, and grow more to cope with the world without constantly being bribed, coaxed, bullied, threatened, humiliated, and hurt. They should not be set endlessly against each other in a race which all but a few must lose. Students should not be constantly made to feel incompetent, stupid, untrustworthy, guilty, fearful, and ashamed. Their interests, concerns, and enthusiasms should not be ignored or scorned, and they should be encouraged, and if they wish, help to work with each other, to learn from each other, and to think, talk, write, and read about the things that most excite and interest them. In short, they should explore the world in their own way, and in as many ways as possible, thereby direct and control their own lives. The accumulation of history's greatest knowledge should be personified in our children through their education. They should be the ones redesigning a new society which could have work to do which is varied and interesting, that challenges and rewards their skill and intelligence. which they could do well and take pride in doing well, over which they could exercise some control, and whose ends and purposes they could understand and respect. Today, very few people feel this way about their work. Only a small number of artists, artisans, specialists, professionals, and a few others. Beyond this, all people should have an opportunity to feel, as very few people do now, that what they think, want, say, and do would make a real difference in their lives and the lives of people around them. Their politics, like their work, would be meaningful. Their elected officials would be public servants, not petty kings and emperors. They would shape and control the society they live in, instead of being shaped and controlled by it. A left-libertarian society should facilitate all these goals. I use the democratic school as an example of how this society might look, because even children are capable of running such a simple system. I also wanted to parallel how, on a micro level, a left-libertarian system might look before I move on to macro examples. Democratic schools are based on the philosophy that children want to learn, not that they have to be bribed and coerced into learning. The teachers are there only for assistance, to help cultivate the child's inner curiosity. The schools are democratic, which means all decisions are made by the students. One person, one vote. They decide the school's budgets. They decide what they want to learn. They make the rules. They are the discipliners and the educators.
Not an easy life being here. I think that's completely false. And I don't think it can change that much. My day-to-day life here was incredibly difficult because I was given this enormous amount of trust from my parents and from the community here to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do with whoever I was. I was left to myself, which was terribly intimidating since I don't know who I am.
You have one person at the front telling all the people who aren't in the front what to think and what to understand and how to think about things. And I don't think that really works in terms of teaching eloquence and teaching real knowledge. I talk to people. Everybody has their own little nuggets of knowledge that they have because they were interested in military history, or they find the idea of Newton's laws of thermodynamics fascinating, whatever that might be. And I talk to people and pick up what they have, which is what gives me my wide-ranging understanding of most of the basic concepts.
The kids have a voice of their own. I mean, they can say stuff too. I mean, there are kids that can fire teachers. It's a pretty cool system, actually.
In general, students are not graded. They don't take tests. There is no mandatory attendance. Children choose what they want to learn and when they want to learn it. They spend more time in art and play. At the beginning of the semester, there's usually a list of classes covering all sorts of subjects, from bike repair to German. Students pick their courses and go to the classes when they want. What is counterintuitive to most of us is that these children turn out just fine. On standardized tests, they perform just as well as public schools, and most of them move on to college.
So I learned how to read when I was 9, because I started when I was like 7, and I would read Bob books. I just got jealous of my sister because she learned how to read when she was 6, and I wanted to learn how to read because she learned how to read, and never really took tests. Like, my tests for reading was starting to read, like, a book that I wanted to read. If I could read it, that was a good thing. If I couldn't, that was a bad thing, If I could read the whole book through without any help, then, it's kind of like a test, I don't know. You have your own, you can do it in your own time, I guess you have to say.
I've taken some math, I've taken social studies, And I'm thinking about taking some Spanish. My mom wants me to learn Spanish so I can be the translator. I've been to Bolivia. Math, well, I remember when I first started, I was like about 5 maybe. And I started like my plus tables and I was like, whoa, this is really hard. Now I'm getting into the algebra. It's like, jeez. Sometimes I do it twice a week, sometimes I do it 3 times a week. So, yeah. I can pretty much stop and go whenever I want. So, it's pretty simple. Typically I do it for an hour.
Every democratic school is different because the students are all unique. Because of this type of education isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Each school is allowed to express itself in its own creative way and to learn from other democratic schools. Because the organization isn't enclosed, education becomes highly fluid and dynamic. There is a self-perfecting mechanism built into the system itself.
I don't think the actual act of teaching is what's poison. I think the act of forcing it upon someone. Like, I think if you actually go to the person and want them to teach you, like in my coding class right now, Michelle, the person who's teaching me, doesn't really even know. I actually think I know more than she does at this moment. If we could all just brainstorm with each other and if we wouldn't have the creativity beaten out of us at an early age, you know. I am a fan of algebra. It's fun. It's just really cool figuring out how you can make an equation this long turn into something this big and have an answer. It's, you know, it's enthralling. If your heart isn't in what you do, you'll never learn it. You just won't. You can try over and over and over again, but you'll forget it. It just kind of like cramming for a test. You remember everything for the test, but after that, you're done.
I mean, I've grown up having friends that have been so much older than me, and I've learned so much from them, and they've been like older siblings to me. But then I've had the younger ones to be like that to them.
Being a child shouldn't be about waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning to sit in sterile classes for 6 hours a day, and then when they go home, they're so tired that the only thing they want to do is watch TV and play video games. In many ways, they are basically going to work. In democratic schools, children learn because they want to learn. They are curious about the world and are driven internally to understand how things work. Public schools, on the other hand, kill creativity. The core philosophy behind education today assumes children can only learn when they are forced by punishment. This isn't to say there are no penalties in democratic schools. Here is an example of students themselves running their own judicial system. After 2 students got into a fight, they had to go to a judicial committee. Here's how the students explain the process.
Well, I say it's sort of like a court. How do I describe it? I basically just say that if you do something wrong, you get written up, and that gets taken to JC, which is a panel made up of people who are students and staff, you know, Fairhaven School meeting members. Then decide your fate by democratic action. And a few people have asked me if it just descends into chaos, which, you know, it doesn't. I mean, it's still pretty well ordered. I mean, it's a little more amorphous than your average school, but I like that. Things don't really get that cold and calculating here at Fairhaven. Your friends, or at least acquaintances that you're trying, you know, but you obviously don't let that get in the way of your decisions. But it still keeps you from just turning it into some kind of bureaucratic machine.
Is there any further discussion on charging grant with dangerous activity? All in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? That does not pass. Matt, you are charged with dangerous activity and harassment. How do you plead?
Guilty.
And how do you plead to harassment?
Guilty.
Okay.
Guilty.
Thank you, Grant. Any sentence ideas from either? Matt, I recall you had one.
I was thinking maybe if you would agree to mediation.
I was actually considering Matt, how do you feel about mediation?
What the heck is that?
Mediation is where you sit down in a room with the person you've been having trouble with and like another person or two that are trained as mediators. You sit down and talk and try to come to a decision that will be best for everyone and leave you guys getting along.
Any more discussion on both of them being referred to school meeting and suggested mediation by that school meeting?
Seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? You guys are referred to school meeting, and it's recommended that you get mediation before that. So you guys can come sign and
I was not on JC, simply sitting and observing, and I saw that he was getting upset, and I was sort of torn. Half of me was saying, oh, I wish he wouldn't be upset. The other half of me was saying, well, he did deserve it. He did nasty things, and now he's getting in trouble. And then he started crying, and although I still felt that he was probably deserving the punishment he got, I had a huge amount of sympathy for him. I definitely feel a lot of compassion for both sides, really. You know, one of them, I'm sorry this thing happened to you, which the other person was at fault for, and then again for the defendant, where even though you did something that wasn't good and was against the rules, I'm still sorry that you're going to get in trouble for it. That doesn't outweigh the fact that you are going to get in trouble for it, and I think you probably deserved it. But you can still feel compassion without necessarily feeling the urge to immediately act upon it.
The real tragedy in public schools today is that children aren't being educated. They're being made into robots. When every child studies the same books and learns the same math and reads the same history, education not only becomes dull, it becomes anti-human. Students today are not learning because they can't retain the information after they take their standardized tests. They have no time to internalize information they've learned and how that knowledge applies to them and their life because they are moving endlessly from one class to another. Our education system has become faith-based. Students are told how the world works dogmatically. They are told history, but they never discover it for themselves. It is no wonder, then, that the more educated a person is, the more likely they will join a cult. The highly educated have been trained to believe anything they perceive as coming from an authoritative figure. Next to the right of life itself, the most fundamental of all human rights is the right to control our own minds and thoughts. That means the right to decide for ourselves how we will explore the world around us, how we think about our own and other person's experiences, and find and make the meaning in our own lives. Whoever takes that right away from us, as the educators do, attacks the very center of our being and does us the most profound and lasting injury. They tell us in effect that we cannot be trusted even to think, that for all of our lives we must depend on others to tell us the meaning of our world and our lives, and that any meaning that we make for ourselves out of our own experiences has no value. There is an alternative. Democracy can prevail in the classroom.
If anyone asks me where I go to school, I have like this sort of standard response. Well, I go to a school called Fairhaven. It's democratically run. For example, you get to elect whether or not the staff gets to stay.
This school meeting today is they're trying to pass a rule that you have to get a parent approval on a sheet that says I am allowing my kid to go down to the stream, which I'm totally all for.
None of these kids were told what to do. Instead, the system works organically, unlike state-run schools, which have to be imposed from the top down. Democratic schools, in many ways, represent left libertarianism. Without hierarchy, even small children don't descend into chaos. Because there are no restraints, the child is allowed to grow unhindered into their natural state of being, expressing the nuances of their surroundings and their own internal state. There is something insanely wrong with our public educational system. We as adults are robbing our children of their innocence, putting them in antiseptic boxes, crushing their creativity, treating them as soldiers for the private sector. Children today are nothing more than commodities to be used, sold, packaged, indexed, examined, and judged. The public schooling system is nothing more than an anti-life institution. We ask, what happened to our children? Why are they so decadent? Why do they do nothing more than watch TV and play video games? But how can we blame the young when they see our lives, when they see mom and dad going to their job for 8 hours a day, when people look more like zombies than substantive beings, when every day is routine, when people are too tired to spend time with their own families? It's not just the public educational system that's screwed up. It's us, the public. We have no choices in life, no say over our own being. We are crushed by a system that cares nothing for us. Public schools should not be assembly lines pushing out cookie-cutter people who go on to live in cookie-cutter homes, who think in cookie-cutter ways. When we inherited a system of education based on hierarchy, we built our society based on that model. We need to create a new democratic education so future generations are able to live in a society that cares for them, one based on our democratic ideals.